Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Book Review Blog. Today we're going to review the book Needful Things by Stephen King. So, imagine that there's a store in your town or wherever that you can go that will give you anything that you want or anything that, like, secretly your heart desires. Again, this could be something that you've always wanted, or something that you remember having as a kid but want back, or remember something from your youth. And the cost is almost nothing, but there is a future cost later on. That's kind of the premise of this book. The full version of this book, or the full title, is called Needful Things, The Last Castle Rock Story. And so I'll get on with why it's called that later on. But this is one of Stephen King's Castle Rock stories. So it's kind of funny because as you read this book, you'll hear mention of other characters from other Castle Rock stories. Like, they mention Johnny Smith from the Dead Zone. They'll mention old Camber's house and business, and that dog that killed 4 people, including Camber himself. That's from Cujo. They mention Tad Beaumont from The Dark Half, which was the last Castle Rock story that I had read and reviewed, and amongst other things. So, that's kind of funny that they mention that type of thing. But this is a book that, kind of like a couple of other Stephen King books, where it's not necessarily dwells on one particular character, even though there are several main characters that they kind of dwell on, but it's about a whole town. Being, of course, the town of Castle Rock. And Castle Rock is, again, it's had its history with other Stephen King books, where you kind of know the people in the town and know kind of what they're about. They're just kind of a simple, small town in Maine, and, they go run about their business and their lives. And one of the things that happens is that a new store pops up in their town called Needful Things. And they're really taken by this because, the opening of a new store in this town is big news and things like that. And the first person to set foot in Needful Things is an 11-year-old boy named Brian Rusk. And he meets the storekeeper, whose name is Leland Gaunt. He's portrayed as a very kind of older man. He dresses very kind of elegantly, like an older man does in old time movies, let's say, or like from 20s or 30s. A lot of times he said that wears like a smoking jacket and other things like that make him kind of seem like he's been plucked out of some other decade rather than the early 90s, which is where this book takes place. And Brian just goes in just to see what this store is all about, and Leland Gaunt convinces him or asks him what Brian really wants or what Brian thinks he really needs. And Brian answers that he really wants a Sandy Koufax baseball card. And Leland Gaunt was like, well, I might have that in my display, or I think I might have that in my back room. And so he goes out and he gets it. And not only is it a Sandy Koufax card, the one that Brian wants, but it is signed, autographed by Sandy Koufax to Brian. And Leland is like, well, that's just a pure coincidence that, this has the same name as you. But Brian is like, well, no, this was destined for me. This is something that I must have. And again, Sandy Koufax I'm not a baseball fan, despite my shirt, but Sandy Koufax is a player that was, quite a long time ago, before the 90s. So having a card of his is worth a lot of money. So Brian is surprised when Leland Gaunt sells him the card for whatever's in his pocket. I think there's like 95 cents in his pocket. But before Brian is able to take the card and leave, Leland Gaunt is like, well, I'm giving you this card for this money, but I want to ask you if, I just want you to play a harmless prank on some member of your town. And they said, do you know a woman named Wilma Jerzyk? And Brian's like, well, yeah, I know her. And that's when that conversation ends for the story. So that's basically kind of the premise of this store, is that people go in and they get what they need, what they think they need, for a small price. But in order to fulfill this transaction, they have to play a harmless prank on some other person in the town. And before the book started, the audience or the reader is led to believe that there are people in this small town who kind of have small, like, run-ins with other people in the town. One of the biggest ones that kind of goes along the story is that the Catholic Church in Castle Rock is hosting a casino night, and that really angers the Baptist Church and the Reverend of the Baptist Church in Castle Rock. And so the Catholics of Castle Rock kind of butt heads with the Baptists of Castle Rock, and most notably the priest of the Catholic Church does, and the Baptist, again, minister of the Baptist Church does. And so all through the book, you kind of see, who are like the Catholics, and who are the Baptists. So that's kind of fun. But for example, the prank that Brian has to play on Wilma Jerzyk. Wilma Jerzyk is a woman who nobody really, people like in the town, but she has run-ins with a lot of people. And one of the people that she has a run-in with is this naive, like, teeny tiny little mousy woman named Nettie Cobb. And Nettie Cobb has come from, like, a hard past where she, like, snapped and killed her husband. And she has had run-ins with Wilma Jerzyk over Nettie's dog. Because Nettie has a puppy named Raider, and the puppy was barking. But now, that was before the book started, so now Raider is fine, he doesn't bark anymore, but still, Wilma just kind of scares Nettie a lot, because Wilma is just like this big, really loud person, and Nettie is just this really calm and naive kind of person. So anyway, Brian ends up playing a trick on Wilma Jerzyk, and the first thing that he does is he slops mud on her clean white sheets that she's hanging, on a clothesline. And Wilma, when Wilma sees this, she immediately thinks that it's Nettie that has done this. And so she starts threatening Nettie and calling Nettie up, saying, you did this, I know you did. And Nettie's like, I don't know what you're talking about, but you're scaring me, and stay away from me, stay away from my dog. And so, but there's another person in the town named Hugh Priest who buys a foxtail from Leland Gaunt that he remembers his dad having on his car. And so Leland Gaunt sells Hugh Priest the foxtail and says, okay, I need you to play a little trick on Nettie Cobb. And so Hugh's like, okay, I know crazy Nettie. She killed her husband. But, he doesn't really run in with her crowd or doesn't really know her on a personal basis. But he knows of her. And so What Hugh does, the harmless prank that Hugh does, is he breaks into Nettie's house and kills her dog. And before he kills her dog, he sticks a note on that when Nettie finds her dog dead and reads the note, makes it seem like Wilma killed her dog. And so that causes the two women to basically have like a showdown, kind of like at the OK Corral type thing, where they're standing you know, across from each other on a street corner, and they end up killing each other with like household items. I think one has like a steak knife and one has like a meat cleaver or something like that. So that alerts the sheriff of Castle Rock, a man named Alan Pangborn, who, again, you might remember from The Dark Half, is where he's first mentioned. And he's like, okay, that's really weird. Things are starting to go on. And he, all through the book, you read that he kind of wants to step into Needful things and just, you know, meet the proprietor and just figure out what he's all about. But now that he's starting to get really busy dealing with the people in his town who are playing tricks on other people, similar to the ones that Brian played on Wilma and Hugh played on Nettie, that caused Wilma and Nettie to go berserk on each other and kill each other. And that's kind of the premise of the book. I don't want to tell a lot what happens, but that's kind of how things down spiral to where the town basically becomes like nothing at the end, which is why it's called the Last Castle Rock story. But even though I just kind of spoiled that, I really want you to read this book. This isn't my favorite Stephen King book, but it's definitely up there in like the top 10. And this is one of those books that, I mean, it's not supernatural exactly, but it's kind of scary, but it's not scary. But I found it hilarious. I mean, there were times where I just started laughing. And I mean, I'm sure I'm kind of sick in that way, but it's just, there's just really funny moments that you just have to start laughing. If you are able to do it, I do recommend getting the audiobook of this because it's read by Stephen King. So you get to have his take and his kind of Maine accent about a Maine story. So I thought that was kind of nice. The next book that I'm going to read by Stephen King is called Dolores Claiborne. So that's it, and I bid you all farewell and happy reading.